Good morning again. Well, we got two awake people. You're going to I want you to be involved in this message this morning. I'll explain as we move along. You never know what kind of introduction friends are going to give you. So it was a little with fear and trepidation. Ken said, I'll introduce you. Thank you, Ken. That was kind this morning. It was good. We're in a series entitled Shaped by the Potter. 2 weeks ago and then last week, Ken talked to us about the four elements. He outlined this cycle where we encounter, we grow, we belong, and we reach. The last couple of weeks, he's focused on the encounter piece. And that's what I want to talk about this morning, encounter. You can read that real quick, and then we'll move on. What does it mean to encounter God, especially in unexpected ways? Over time, we develop what become normal routines of life. When we go to bed, what time we get up, what time we go to work, what our weekends look like, the time we eat, what we eat, the restaurants we go to, the TV we watch, the movies we go to, the family times, the devotion times, the Bible reading, prayer. We develop the routines of life. It often becomes a wash, rinse, repeat. Wash, rinse, repeat. Day after day. Day after day. And it becomes routine. It becomes mundane sometimes. We get used to that. But when something unexpected comes along, it can throw us off. Where'd that come from? Sometimes it can create angst or worry. Sometimes it creates anxiety. But it can also change our lives for better or for worse, depending on how we react to that. Fran and I had been married maybe for a year, and I was finishing my senior year at Nyack College, an Alliance Bible School in Nyack, New York. And life was good. God had been part of my life. I spent time in the Word and prayer. I had a routine where God talked to me, where I heard from God, where I understood what God was doing. When I was 17, God called me to be a missionary. And I was at college with that in mind, frankly. I was going to the mission field. So one Sunday on the way to church, a friend asked me, "So what are you doing about going to the mission field?" And it kind of took me by surprise. Well, that's what I'm planning on doing. In fact, what I plan to do is get a master's degree, then a PhD, and then move along in the process. And out of nowhere, life changed. I heard a voice. My friend didn't hear it. I heard it so clearly, and that voice said, "I don't need you in 10 years. I need you now." Just so clear. It changed friends in my life. A little over 3 years later, we were on our way to France. Not 10 years. A little over 3 years, we were on our way to France for language study, then on to Gabon, Africa for 3 terms, France for 3 terms, then, as Ken mentioned, the Europe, Middle East region for what would be 3 terms as well. It changed my life. I wasn't expecting that. Encountering God and the unexpected. Let's look at some biblical examples. And I'm going to take the first person on this. You can figure out who it is. Let's look at Genesis 37. My father Jacob had flocks of sheep, and my brothers were taking care of the sheep, and they had moved over toward Shechem, which was a good day's journey. And my father wondered how they were doing. So he said, son, I want you to go check on your brothers and come back and give me a report. Let me know how it's going. So I went to Shechem and saw the fields where I thought they were supposed to be, but they weren't there. And I asked somebody, "Have you seen my brothers and the flocks of sheep?" "Oh, they moved up toward Dothan, which is another 13 miles to the north." So I went to Dothan. And as I was approaching my brothers, because I saw them in the field, I didn't know this, but they were planning on killing me. We didn't get along because I was my father's favorite son, and he had given me this magnificent coat that I was wearing. It was embroidered beautifully with multiple colors. It was just special. My brothers were planning on killing me. Our oldest brother, Reuben, said, no, we can't kill him. He's our flesh and blood, but let's throw him in the cistern, then we can figure out what we're going to do. So I got to my brothers, and they grabbed me and took the coat off me and threw me in a dry well. I wasn't expecting that. And then a caravan of Ishmaelites came by. Ishmael was the first son of Abraham, my grandfather. And there was no love lost between Ishmael's kids and Abraham or Isaac's kids and Jacob's. We were Jacob's sons. And the Ishmaelites were not our friends. They were kind of family, but we didn't get along. So my brothers decided rather than kill me, we're going to sell him to the Ishmaelites who were on their way to Egypt with a caravan. And that's what they did. They pulled me out of the well, sold me to the Ishmaelites, and I ended up in Egypt on the slave block. And I was bought by a high official in Pharaoh's army. His name was Potiphar. But Potiphar discovered something when I began working for him. Everything I did had the Lord's blessing. He was doing something marvelous. And Potiphar made me the head of his whole household. It was amazing. The problem was Potiphar's wife thought I was kind of good looking, and she wanted to spend time with me. But I kept refusing her until one day I was in the house alone with her, and she tried to seduce me, actually. And I ran from her, but she grabbed my cloak, and I left the house right away because it was the wrong thing to do what she wanted. Potiphar came home, and his wife said, "Look what this Hebrew slave did. He tried to attack me, and here's his coat to prove it." And Potiphar threw me in jail. Say it with me. I sure wasn't expecting that. So here I am in jail. But again, God blessed because I was obedient to him. The jailer ended up making me in charge, almost the warden of all the jail. Pharaoh sent two of his servants, two of his officials, to jail for some crazy charges. And they both ended up with dreams that I interpreted for them, and those dreams came true. Those men, one of them ended up dying. The other was returned to the service with Pharaoh. And it was kind of cool, but except I was still in jail. I sure wasn't expecting that. And Pharaoh ended up having a dream. And he talked to all his magicians and wise men and astrologers, and none of them could interpret the dream. And one of the guys that I'd interpreted the dream for remembered me in jail. So he mentioned it to Pharaoh. Pharaoh had me released, brought me before him. Obviously, they cleaned me up because I was kind of dirty and stuff. And I interpreted those dreams for Pharaoh to the degree that he made me the second highest official in the whole country of Egypt. Say it with me. I sure wasn't expecting that. No, I wasn't. But God did some incredible things. Let's look at Exodus chapter 3. I was the prince of Egypt. I had everything. The best education, the best foods, a great life, trained in military matters and stuff like that. I was the prince of Egypt. My life was great before me, but I knew I was a Hebrew. And I saw my people who were suffering. And I did something foolish. I ended up killing an Egyptian overlord. And I had to flee Egypt. Say it with me. I sure wasn't expecting that. And I ended up down in the Sinai Peninsula, the Sinai Desert, where I married a lady who was the daughter of one of the priests of the whole Sinai Peninsula. 40 years I spent down there serving my father-in-law, Jethro. I was with the sheep one time, his flock on the far side of the desert, and let me tell you, the Sinai Desert is disastrous. You think you got it bad here in Colorado sometimes for dry? You know nothing about dry, dusty sand, rocks, mountains. It was crazy. Talk about mundane life. There was no wash, rinse, repeat because there wasn't much water. But life was boring. So I was with Jethro's sheep. We were on the far side of the desert, and I saw something in the distance. It was a bush. It was on fire. I'd never seen anything like that before. I thought, I got to go check this out. And as I got closer, the bush wasn't burning. I mean, it wasn't disappearing. It was on fire, but it wasn't being destroyed. And this is really weird. So I got closer and closer, and as I got closer, I heard a voice saying, "Moses, Moses." If you haven't figured out who that is, I just told you. I said, here I am, Lord. Moses, take off your sandals. You're standing on holy ground. What God is this? I mean, I knew all the gods of Egypt, and I had heard about the Hebrew God, Elohim and Adonai and things like that. And I said, who are you? And he said, I am that I am. I fell down before him. And then God said something to me that changed my life. He said, Moses, I've heard your people's cry, the children of Israel's cry, the misery they've been under. I'm going to send them home. I'm going to provide them to a new land, and I'm sending you back to Pharaoh to lead the children of Israel out. Say it with me. I sure wasn't expecting that. No, I wasn't. Let's look at 1 Kings chapter 19. I had just participated in an incredible demonstration of God's power. We were on Mount Carmel, and he sent fire down on a sacrifice that had been soaked in water. The prophets of Baal had been destroyed, and God did such an incredible thing. It was powerful, to say the least. I was so exhausted after that experience. In fact, I was so tired, and I was actually afraid because Jezebel, the queen had told me that she was going to kill me by the next morning. So I ran away. I ran down to southern Israel, down to Beersheba, went into the desert, and God said, he fed me twice, actually. And then I walked for 40 days and 40 nights south to the mountain of God, Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai. And when I got there, I went into a cave, expecting God was going to talk to me, expecting God was going to communicate with me and give me what my next challenge was, my next purpose. And I'm in the cave, and God said, okay, I'm coming. I kind of stuck my head outside the cave, and a wind came. But it was, a wind is too mild a term. It picked rocks up and shattered them. That was, God had moved part of the Red Sea when he led the children of Israel out of Egypt. With the wind, God was in that wind, but he wasn't in the wind that was on the mountain. I didn't hear from him. And then he sent an earthquake. And let me tell you, an earthquake's not a place, a cave is not a place to be in an earthquake. But it shook the whole mountain. But he wasn't in the earthquake. And then a fire came. The fire had been there with the children of Israel when they were before God on Mount Sinai, and I was expecting God in the fire, but he wasn't there either. And then out of nowhere, I heard this still, small whisper, a gentle murmur, and God talked to me. Say it with me. I sure wasn't expecting that. Let's move to the New Testament. Whoops. Matthew, oh no, we're going to do one more. We're going to go to Jonah. Here's a story that you're all familiar with. I was a prophet of God, and he told me to go to Nineveh. Now, Nineveh is a huge city with 500,000 people living there, and he told me, go and proclaim that they need to repent and confess their sin and repent. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. So I got on a ship that was heading, Nineveh was to the east, and I got on a ship that was heading to the west towards Spain. And you know the story. The storm came up. It was a wicked storm. It was hard. It was really bad. The sailors were throwing stuff overboard, trying to save the ship and the people on it. I don't know what was going on, but I was below decks, and I had fallen asleep. I know that sounds kind of weird, but I guess I was really tired. The sailors cast lots to find out who was responsible for the storm, and it fell on me. So they woke me up and said, what did you do? And I told them what I had done. I was running away from God. And the only thing they could do to stop the storm would be to throw me overboard. They didn't want to do that. I appreciated that thought, but eventually they did. And a great big fish swallowed me. Say it with me. I sure wasn't expecting that. 3 days and 3 nights I was in the belly of the fish praying. God was doing something. That fish vomited me up on dry land. And I went to Nineveh, and I preached. And you know what happened? Nineveh repented. Say it with me. I sure wasn't expecting that. That was crazy. Matthew 5. We had just spent an entire night fishing on the Sea of Galilee. We hadn't caught a thing. We were sitting on the shore mending our nets. Our boats were there just rolling gently on the water. And Jesus was in the distance preaching, teaching. And the crowd kept growing bigger and bigger. And as the crowd grew, Jesus kept backing up toward the water, almost to the point where the crowd was going to push him into the water. But he saw the boats there, and he stepped into mine and said, just push out a little bit, and I'll teach from there. And he did for quite a while. And when he finished teaching, he said to me, okay, let's go out into the deep water where you can throw your nets in for a catch. What? You're a carpenter. You don't know the first thing about fishing. That's my job. Don't you know that you don't fish during the day? The fish in this sea, in this lake, they go under the shoals where it's cooler during the day so the sun doesn't make the water too hot for them. That's why we fish at night when they come out from under the shoals. And we had fished all night and nothing. But because you're Jesus and you'd healed my mother-in-law a few days before, okay, we'll do it. You know what happened? We caught so many fish, our nets began to break and the boats began to sink. Say it with me. I sure wasn't expecting that. And the crazy thing is, that's not all. Jesus told me not to be afraid because from now on, I wouldn't be fishing for fish, I'd be fishing for men. I sure wasn't expecting that either. But he proved that he was worth trusting and obeying. Look for a second at Acts chapter 8. After Stephen was stoned, a great persecution took place in Jerusalem. And Christians, Jesus followers, began to scatter all over the place. And they preached the gospel as they went. I was in a city in Samaria, and God was doing some incredible things. Miracles, cripples being healed, demons come shrieking out of people. And people were rejoicing because of the good news that we were proclaiming. And then an angel appeared to me. I wasn't expecting that. And told me to go to the road to Gaza that comes out of Jerusalem down south to Gaza. Now, I was up in Samaria, and it took me a couple days to walk down to that road that led to Gaza. And when I got there, I saw an Ethiopian eunuch who happened to be the treasurer for Queen Candace's whole treasury. Candace was the queen of Ethiopia. And the Spirit said to me, go stand next to that chariot, which I did. And the eunuch, the official, the treasurer, was reading from Isaiah. And I asked him, do you understand what you're reading? He said, no, I don't. Can you help me understand? Invited me up into the chariot, which was really kind of cool. And we were reading from Isaiah 53 that talks about the Messiah. And he said, can you explain what this means? And I could. And I told the Ethiopian leader who Jesus was, the Messiah, the Son of God, who had died on the cross recently. And the Ethiopian believed. We rode on a little further and got to a stream. And he said, why can't I be baptized? And so we did. We got out of the chariot. We baptized him. And as we were coming out of the water, the Spirit took me away from him and put me into another city. Say it with me. I sure wasn't expecting that. I wish he transported me like that, coming from Samaria instead of having to walk for 3 days. But I can tell you, I wasn't expecting to move around like that or to see a top Ethiopian official be baptized and believe and take the gospel back to Ethiopia. That was incredible. I wasn't expecting that. Acts chapter 9. Man, how I hated those Jesus followers. I was a top-notch Pharisee, schooled by the best school, Gamaliel. I was serving, obeying the law, prosecuting these Jesus followers. In fact, I was carrying letters from the chief priest in Jerusalem to Damascus to arrest anyone who was part of the way and bring them back to Jerusalem to put them in jail. I was traveling with some companions, and as we got close to Damascus, this brilliant, bright light flashed. I fell to the ground, and I heard a voice saying, "Why are you persecuting me?" What? I'm being obedient to the law. I'm doing what I should be doing. This is what my life should be. This is what I've dedicated my life to. And that voice said, "Go to the city, and you'll learn what I have for you." Say it with me. I sure wasn't expecting that. You're not all participating. Wake up. Say it with me. I sure. That's better. Thank you. And that experience changed my life forever as I followed Jesus and served him all over the place, even getting as far as Rome, where I died. Acts 12. King Herod had arrested some of those who belonged to the church in Jerusalem. In fact, he even had James' brother put to death. And he arrested Peter because he saw that this was very pleasing to the Jews, and his plan was to put Peter on trial and probably to kill him. And it was horrible. Many members of the church were meeting at John Mark's mother's house to pray earnestly for Peter's release. We were praying like crazy. But we didn't know what God was doing. Peter had been arrested and was chained to 2 soldiers in the prison sleeping. Picture that, chained to 2 soldiers trying to sleep. I can't imagine how comfortable that would have been, if even possible. And a light shone, an angel appeared, hit Peter and said, wake up, get up. The chains fell off. He said, follow me, put your cloak on, let's go. And we walked by the other guards who were supposed to be protecting me, who were later killed by King Herod. We got to the iron gate that led to the city, and the gate just opened miraculously, and we were out in the street. The angel disappeared. So what did I do? Well, Peter came to John Mark's mother's house, was knocking on the door repeatedly, while we were still praying. And Rhoda, one of the servant girls there, heard the knocking on the door, went to the door, and who's there? Who's there? It's Peter. Let me in, let me in. She was so excited she came to the room where we were praying and said, Peter's at the door, Peter's at the door. What? You're crazy. Peter's in jail. No, Peter's at the door. That must be his angel. It's not Peter. But the knocking continued, so we finally went to the door, opened it, and it was Peter. Say it with me. I sure wasn't expecting that. Let me introduce you to Badiboko. I had believed in Jesus and thought he was asking me to serve him, but I was young and had other plans. I had decided I had my whole life before me. I decided I would join the Presidential Guard in Gabon, Africa, where Fran and I lived actually where I was born too, but that's another story. The wrong eye, sorry, I'm back to being Badiboko. I joined the Presidential Guard, and part of the training you had to go through was to jump out of an airplane with parachutes. We had done 2 successfully. We were on the 3rd one, after which I would be inducted into the Presidential Guard, a very prestigious group of soldiers. And as I jumped out of the plane, my parachute got tangled in the drag line and got stuck. And here I was, 10,000 feet in the air, upside down, with a parachute that didn't work. I was still close enough to the airplane, I could hear the jump instructor say, I have to cut you loose, I hope your emergency chute works. And I knew what was going on. I remembered the story of Jonah. Jonah ran away from God, and that's what I was too. So I simply said, Jesus, if you spare me, I'll serve you with my life. He did. It was kind of interesting because when you join the Presidential Guard, it's not easy to get out of it. So when I landed, my secondary chute did open, and when I landed, I broke my leg. And I was sent back to the village to recuperate. Several months later, the Presidential Guard members came to get me and to bring me into the Guard. And then they said, oh, wait, you broke your leg. You can't be in the Guard. So I was excused from the Guard, which was God doing something. Say it with me. I sure wasn't expecting that. And for the last 40 plus years, I've served God faithfully in Gabon in different capacities. You know, God doesn't always limit connecting with us in the normal routines of life, which he does, which is fine, which is normal. But those retreats, conferences, church meetings, prayer meetings, where he does meet us, there are other times when he comes, he encounters people in quite unusual, unexpected ways. But when we recognize him in those unexpected moments and submit to his will and direction, that's when he gets a hold of us. He can turn our resistance into surrender, our questions into clarity, our fear into courage and strength. And he does it for a good purpose. Ephesians chapter 2 tells us that we are God's workmanship. We were created to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. There's a purpose for our lives. It's not the mundane life wash, rinse, repeat cycle. There are things he has for us to do. Speaking to the people of Israel and to us today, he tells the prophet Jeremiah, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. He has plans for each of us. We just need to be attuned to when he's trying to speak to us. Recognize that God's plans are for his glory and for our good. And we need to be aware that he reaches us sometimes in less than normal circumstances, less than normal ways, in unexpected encounters. Be aware of this. Be open to them. And respond positively when God has something for us that's out of the ordinary.